Today we're going to explore the differences between an overlock serger and a cover lock serger. And we'll look at some of the different types of stitches you can do. And I do have some good examples of what you can be making with some of those stitches. So I hope you can join me for the whole hour because we have lots of fun things to talk about. And I know that there's a lot of questions out there about what you can do with a serger and what's the difference between an overlock and a cover lock. So to start the show, we are going to just switch over and look at some of the examples of what you can do with a serger. And a serger and an overlock are the same thing, basically just a different word. So here's an example of a napkin that was made, and I used a 3-thread rolled hem, which is a really nice tight edge, on a basic cotton quilting, and it was embroidered. On the other side, you'll see there's another embroidery. Let me see if I can fold it back the other way. This one's a little bit more delicate looking. And then another napkin, this time done with 2 different layers of fabric. Now, the nice thing about making napkins like this is you can make a napkin in under 5 minutes. You can make a set of 12 in an hour. So a serger is very quick and it's very easy to do it. Another type of thing you can do is work with shears. And I love working with sheer fabrics, all different types of fabrics, but a 3-thread rolled hem does a nice job finishing that edge. The difference between a rolled hem is very tight against the seam, and a 3-thread narrow hem is covering more of the surface and is not usually quite as tight. But very, very easy to do all of these. Now, if you were doing a rolled hem without any fabric, you would get a very thin type of stitch. Wait a second here, let me move some of these things over. You would get something that could be very, very thin, like, for example, the chain that I made this necklace for. I did a 3-thread rolled hem, and I didn't use thick threads, but I did it over a fishing line. And this was the fishing line that I used. It was a 12-pound, but just doing a simple stitch. So today I'm going to show you how you can do that and what the results are when you do it. But look what a fun necklace that makes. Now, imagine something like this if you went out and purchased it. It would not be inexpensive, but because I made it from basically simple threads and also some beads, this cost me less than $3 to make. And I think it looks pretty fun. The other thing I made with this is this scarf from some silk. And I bought a piece of silk for around $8. I dyed it myself. And then I finished the edge of it to make a really nice finished scarf. And so that's where I bought it to work with this, and I dyed it so that it would fit the colors that I was working with. And usually I just wear it like this and put it on like that. You can do all different kinds of things with it. So we're going to move over to the Admire Air 5000 and look to see how you do a covered edge on a piece of sheer fabric. So we're going to switch my cameras over. And that is the Admire Air 7000. That is the cover lock version. But the first version we're going to look at, wait a second here, I'm going to move my camera right here like this. This is the Admire Air 5000. And it is an overlock stitch, but it is a little bit different than any that we've had before because it does have air threading. Now, I have my machine set up for a cover stitch, not a cover stitch, sorry, a 3-thread rolled hem. And I looked in my book to find the different settings because here I have to set my settings for what I want them to be for a rolled hem. But all the instructions, you'll find that in any serger book, it will tell you how to set up for a rolled hem. Now, this is a very sheer organza, and you can see that I've already started it. And all I have to do is put my foot on the pedal, and it's going to do the job. So if I look in the back, you'll see what a nice job that did. Isn't that a pretty stitch on a very, very fine edge? Now, the nice thing about this is it's not going to ravel. It's going to wash really well. And you can use a stitch like a cover stitch, a 3-thread rolled hem like this. If anytime you're making bridesmaids gowns, or you've got sheer edges to a skirt or a dress where you need to hem it, hemming it with a rolled hem is sometimes more of a challenge. But when you're on a serger, you get a beautiful finished edge like that. You can match the thread colors so they're invisible and you don't even see them. On here, when you look at the scarf, I use the exact same thread colors as the scarf, and it becomes invisible. You don't see it. And if you want it to show up as an accent, then you can do that also. When we look at some of our other stitches here, here is a very, very tight rolled hem. You can see in the black, it's much, much heavier. And I used a poly yarn for that. And so it really pulls it in nice and tight and gives it a very strong look and finish to that edge. Now, with that, I made this quilt using those techniques. These were all strips that I made individually like this. And then I sewed them into other strips to give it kind of a very fun modern look to it. But all of this was done on the serger so far. Every single part of that has been done with the serger. So it gives it some really fun edging to it. When you're looking at the black, everything you see, that black edging, that's all done with a rolled hem from a serger. So something to think about when you're trying to get a special look for threads is how you can choose a stitch to get the look you want. Yes, there was a question about, can you use metallic thread in the needles? Yes, you can use metallic thread in the needles, but I would not use it for a rolled hem. When you're doing a rolled hem, the thread that's showing up right now, I have a variegated thread in the top. And let's go over back to the machine a minute and we'll look here, okay? So I have 3 threads set up on my machine. 2 of them are variegated. One of the left needle is variegated, and then the top looper is variegated. The bottom is a poly yarn. And the reason I did that is because the poly yarn pulls in. It kind of gathers. So when you're doing a 3-thread rolled hem, the top looper is wrapping all the way around, and it's wrapping the fabric. It's actually, you can't really tell it, but it's taking the fabric on the edge and rolling it to the back. That's why it's called a rolled hem. So you do not see the needle. The needle kind of disappears. What you're seeing on the top and the bottom, if you do it right, is that upper looper. The needle disappears, and so does the back looper disappear. So there's not really any point in using a metallic thread for the needle. If you wanted to, I would use it for the upper looper, and you would get a better look like that. Let's see, I've got another question here. I'm new to sergers. It looks like the machine is doing the stitching and cutting. That's exactly what a serger does. It cuts off the edge of the fabric, and it gives you this beautiful finished edge. And that's what makes a serger so special. Now, both an overlock and a cover lock will cut that. The difference when you go to a cover lock machine is you can sew on the fabric itself, but an overlock machine can only sew on the edge of the fabric. So we have a question about what weight of thread do you use when in the needle and the upper looper. In the needle, you can use anything. I am using a rayon 40 weight thread. You can use a cotton thread. You can use a sulky 30 weight, but I don't usually go and use a thicker thread in the needle when I'm doing a rolled hem. I want that needle thread to disappear. And so I want it to be strong, but I don't want it to be having any presence. When it comes to, and let me see if I'll pull over another rolled hem for you to look at. All right, here with this case here. In this case, I've got this beautiful rolled hem, but I used the poly yarn, the same pink poly yarn I'm using right now in the lower looper. I used it in the upper and roller looper, and look at how gorgeous that is. It's beautiful. It's strong. The reason that I use that is whenever I'm doing a rolled hem, I love the poly yarn because it's actually a very stretchy thread. So what it'll do is it pulls around and it kind of gathers and pulls that fabric to the back, and it gives you that nice small like tight stitch that you don't get if you're using regular threads sometimes. So a rolled hem is very different than a traditional hem. Now, the stitch next to this is my rolled hem, but over here, this is a 3-thread narrow. The only difference when you're using a rolled hem or a narrow is just a couple of settings on your machine. So I'm going to go back to my serger, and we're going to open it up and have a look to see what's different. Now, this is my thread catcher. And when I open it up, I'll move this back over here so you can see it a little bit better. So inside my serger, if I'm doing a rolled hem, the stitch fingers are retracted. So it tells me in my book that I'm not going to be having it set on the normal. I'm going to set it on rolled. So all I do is I pull it back to set it into the rolled position. I have 2 air threading loopers right here, and they are very easy to use, and I just love it. This is the very first time we have had an air threading machine, and it is just a delight to thread the loopers. All you have to do when you're threading the loopers is you set it so that which thread you want to use. Down here you have a little lever. If you want to use the air threading for the loopers, you move this over here, and then the loopers get locked into position. Let me just pull this up a little bit, get it gathered here. Now the loopers are locked. And then I would put the thread in through here, raise this lever right here, and then pull it down, and that threads the thread through the looper. I mean, it's instantaneous and amazing. Then to use the other looper, you just move that over there and you repeat the process. And that's for regular threads. If you're going to use a heavier thread, like something like this is a very heavy thread, then there is a little wire that comes with your Admire Air 5000, and you would push the wire through. You don't use the threading, but you push the wire through. It will go through and come right out through the looper. And on the end of the wire, there's a little loop, and you put this thread through it and pull it through. You don't want to use a knot or tie off like you might on some of the older ones, because if the knot is too big, it's going to get caught in there, and then there's not much you can do about it. So using the wire is really recommended when you're threading for thicker threads like this. So if I wanted to use this heavier thread to do a rolled hem, I would not use it in the needle, and I wouldn't use it in the lower looper. I would only use it in the upper looper, which is this one right here. And so I hope that makes sense to you. Now, if I'm going to go, the more you know about serging, this is very much like every traditional serger that's out there. And you can see up here, we have our tension settings where you can go and set them. When I'm set up for a rolled hem, my needle tension is going to be set for normal, which is between 3 and 4. My upper looper is going to be low, very low, because that upper thread is going to wrap to the back. And my lower looper is going to be at a higher setting. All sergers work like this, no matter what serger you have. Now, I'm also lucky up here to have the ability to change my press-a-foot pressure if I had a reason to do it. And then I have my needle threader, which is a really fun little needle threader to thread your left and right needle. And if I'm going to close it up, I'll just close it up. And now I'm ready to search. The other things you need to do when you're set up on, you know why it's not closing? And this is what I love about the air threading sergers. It won't close if you have the setting set on threading the loopers. It won't let you close it. And so all you do is do that. Now you're set for a regular stitch. So you can't even make a mistake. That's how nice it is. Now, on our Admire Air 5000, the other thing you do if you're going to do a rolled hem is you set this for tight instead of a normal stitch. So it knows that it's going to be pulling in. And then on the side here, we have a setting for a rolled hem where the R is. And normally you're setting your stitch length is going to be somewhere around a 2.5. But if you're doing a rolled hem, you would move it to the R, so the R would be in the setting. The only reason usually I use a very long stitch is if I'm gathering, and then you want to go to as long a stitch as you can, and you can move it up to the 5. The other dial that's right next to that, that's the differential, and we can talk about that another time. But for now, let's switch over and see what is different when we're doing a rolled hem with our Admire 7000. So right now on my Admire 7000, I'm actually set up for a cover stitch. I can sew in the middle of my fabric, and that's something you can only do with a cover lock machine. Most sergers that are overlocks, they can only sew on the edge of the fabric. But if you have a cover lock machine, then you can set it up so you've got this nice flat area. And what I love about our Admire 7000 is we've got a lot of room in here. Maybe not as much room as the sewing machine does, but when I was doing this, I was quilting this fabric, and I'll pull it up so you can see it a little bit closer. All of this is done with a cover lock stitch. I used a chain stitch, then I did a cover lock narrow, and I did the wide, and you can kind of change up the settings. There's all different kinds of stitches you can do. What makes it a little bit easier on our, let me see if I can get this in focus for you here. On our Admire 7000, there is a screen that's very much like our sewing machine. And so you can say, what stitch do I want to do? This is a cover stitch narrow. Say I wanted to set it for a rolled hem. I can go and I can see all the different types of threads. There's an overlock narrow. There's a narrow edge. Each one of these will be a little bit different. And if I keep going, you'll see that I have a flat lock, narrow and wide. And then here's my 3-thread rolled edge. So when I select it, it will tell me that I need to move my stitch finger from normal to the R. And it will let me know my blade should be up. It's telling me everything I need to know. But the fabulous thing about it is it actually changed all my settings and my tensions. So I don't have to do that. I can leave my machine set this way. I don't have to think about tensions because it's automatically done for you according to the stitch you select. On a serger that doesn't have a screen like this, you're going to need to go into your book when you change your stitch and see what the recommended settings are, and then change everything automatically. I'm right now, I'm set up for a 3-thread. No, I'm not. I'm set up for a cover stitch narrow. And how do I know if I'm set up for a cover stitch narrow or not? If I look at it, I can see that it's telling me I need to use needles C and D. It shows me a picture of what my needles are. Let me see if I can zoom in there a little bit more for you to see that. All right, let me see. Oh, that's probably a little too blurry. Let's try that. Okay, so what I'm doing, and when you have a machine like the Admire 7000, it's telling you everything you need to do. All right, right now, it changed my differential if it needed to change. My stitch length is 2.5, and it's telling me what needles to thread. So I have the left and right needles selected, and I've got that threaded right here. And then if I look at my tensions, you can see that my looper, the only looper that I'm using, is set for 0. There's no tension on that at all, which it seems kind of weird, right? The way that this is working, it is acting like it's working with a twin needle on a sewing machine. And if you look behind at the back of it, you'll see on the stitching here that I have 2 rows of stitching, and the looper is on the back side, or on the right side in this case, and it's acting like a zigzag. It's going back and forth between the needles and making the stitch. So I thought I would show you what it would be like if you're setting up to do a cover stitch like this. Right now we're set up for wide, and I have a green thread in the back, And I'm going to pull over another fabric just so that you can see what it looks like. I've just got a regular fabric here. Now you notice how bright my my machine seems, right? There's a lot of light coming from this area, and this is because the lighting on the Admire Air 7000 is much, much brighter than if you look over here on the 5000. So that's another thing that's quite a bit different. Now, I do have a knee lift. You'll see it down here with all my mess on my floor. And all I have to do to lift up the foot is touch the knee lift, and then I can put my fabric underneath it. The one thing that when you're working with any cover stitches or chain stitches you need to have fabric underneath your foot when you're doing this. I see there's a few questions, so let me come and catch up with some of the questions before I go too far. All right. So there was a great question, Karen. Even though it auto sets your tensions, can you manually adjust it for preference and then save it? Absolutely. That is one of the best things. There's a lot of sergers out there where there is automatic settings, but you can't override it. And to me, why would you want to do that? Because there's so many different specialty stitches that I use. I want to override it. To me, there's a lot of times, like a friend, Diane Sedolia, came up with this 4-thread rolled hem, which is fascinating, but she invented it, so I didn't want to show it. But one day maybe you'll see it in something that she's done. And what was fascinating about that is you couldn't do that on another serger where you don't have manual settings. So the automatic settings are there for you to use. And then if you have a special stitch that you want to make, then you can do it. Same thing with the gathering stitch. When you're doing a gathering stitch, we do have a gathering foot, and it does a great job in gathering, but I usually like to have a tighter gather, and then I'll leave threads on either end, and I'd like to be able to adjust the gather and make it fuller. So maybe my skirt, I need 30 inches. Well, that's a dream, but let's say I needed 30 inches. Then I can gather really, really tight, and then I can pull it off so it's going to match the fabric I'm sewing to it exactly. That is huge, that you can manually change your tensions. And that's really something that a lot of the sergers out there can't do. And so, and Terry asked about, I wish PFAFF would offer an inspiration book for the 7000 or a workbook. Well, you know what, Terry, you're in luck. Now, all you need to do is talk to your dealer. There is actually a technique. I wasn't going to talk about this till later, but there's actually a technique workbook for the Admire 7000 that does exactly what you want. It isn't out to the public, but you can get it through your dealer's store, and you could ask them maybe if they could do some classes, because that's what I did. I went through and I've actually made all kinds of samples for the individual ones. Look at this, is done with beading, and I put a sample in there of what's beading, and then you can change it. So you can get this through your dealer. You just need to talk to them. So go into your favorite dealer and have a conversation with them, because it is available. And thank you for asking the question, Terry, because that's a great, great comment. So I hope that helps. All right. And, I think now what's going to happen is we have some really amazing sergers, and you're going to start to see that a lot of us are going to do classes like this. And if you like them, make sure to let us know, and we will do more. I mean, I could do one class just about rolled hem, and another class just about a 4th thread, because each and every type of stitch, I think there's 26 stitches on the Admire 7000. If I'm wrong, I'll correct it. And I think there's somewhere between 12 and 15 on the 5000. So there is so much more to a serger than what you realize. Now, I'm going to go back and I'm going to stitch on that cover stitch so you can see how that works, because there is a special technique when you're finishing up. Remember what I said. If you're doing a cover stitch, narrow, a wide, or triple stitch, or you're doing a chain stitch, you can't sew off like you do for everything else on the serger. Normally, when you're using an overlock, you just sew off and chain off, and then you cut your thread and you leave a tail and you start up again. A cover lock is a little bit different when you're doing decorative stitches. So I'll switch back over and I'm going to show you how, because this is a technique that is really specific to the cover stitches. Now, I just used a plain piece of fabric, and I'm starting set up. I have a 12-weight cotton thread. It's a sulky blendable in the bobbin. And I don't know if this is, you're not going to see much from the top. Now, when I get to the end, I have two choices. I can, let me see if I can zoom in here a little bit. I can do two things. I could stop and put a leader in front and sew off onto that leader like some people do when they're piecing a quilt. I personally like to do it a little bit different. I like to lock the stitch. So I lift my presser foot up, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the two threads and pull the two threads forward so I've got some fullness there. I'm going to put my little, the tool that I use to change my needle, I'm going to put it underneath those threads and pull it forward without twisting the threads. And I'll leave it there while I gather my scissors. Now, this is where the trick comes in. Your needles, if they are in the highest position, that bobbin thread, the looper thread will pull right out. But when you cut, you need to cut this loop. I always cut the loop that is not being sewn. You see, this is up here. I cut the ones that are being sewn and are used close to where those threads are. And then all you have to do is pull it back, and it'll completely release that. And if you remember anything, if you have a cover stitch machine, if you remember that technique, you're going to be really happy with that. And then when we look on the front, there you can see the decorative stitch. Isn't that pretty? This could really work nice to make a little plaid. If I wanted to add stitches to it, I didn't bother about sewing straight. But imagine how nice it would be, because you could use this plaid and actually do maybe every 6 rows with that narrow cover stitch. Now, the only difference between a cover stitch, you can see what I mean, by the way. Look at the back. It looks like I was sewing with a twin needle, right? It's 2 rows of needles. On the front, which is now my front, so I'm obviously sewing upside down. That's where my decorative thread is. And it is very much like the results you get with a twin needle, but it is much heavier and much prettier than that. So when you look over here on the one that I did with the serger, the blue one, that is the same stitch I just did. The one that's next to it in the green, that is a chain stitch, not a cover stitch. And it's only using 1 needle. The one down below is a cover stitch, where in the purple blendable, that is a cover stitch wide. And so there is many, many more stitches than that. These are just 3 of the stitches. All I have to do to switch it from a cover stitch narrow to a chain stitch is take out the left needle. Well, and technically I also have to go and select the stitch, right? So let's say that I choose my stitch. Let me just go up here and choose my stitch. And I'm going to go to a chain stitch. And there we go. I couldn't find my stylus. So now you'll see it's saying you only want the D needle in. You don't want the C needle. So I'm going to take out, let's see if I can give you a better view of this, holding my hands out. I like to leave the thread in the needle, because as I'm loosening the needle, this is a really good tip too, you'll remember when you drop your needle. So I loosen the needle because the thread is in there. If my needle accidentally drops down, I can grab it because the thread's still attached to it. So it's only after I've taken the needle out that I'm going to go and take that needle thread completely out. You don't want to sew with it being in place. And so, is there anything else that needs to change besides the needle coming out? The answer is no, that's it. So right now I have 1 looper and I have 1 needle. And that's what makes a chain stitch. And it's beautiful chain stitch. So I really love it. And if you need to go and look at the information, you'll see here, these settings didn't change. Those are the settings that have always been there. The only thing that really changed between a cover stitch narrow and a cover stitch and a chain stitch is the needle. So I will pull the same fabric over for you to see. And then I'll show you some more examples of what a chain stitch can do. And I'm going to put my fabric down. Let me just lower my presser foot down. And then we'll sew. And you can sew around a curve. You can go anywhere you want to with this. And this looks very decorative. So look at that. Isn't that pretty? It's a very, very thick, heavy stitch. And it gives you a lot of presence on the front of your fabric. So let me go and gather a couple of other ones so I can show you what that looks like. If you see that's done. And I think I've got a couple of other examples. Let me see if I can find it. How did a half an hour go by already? It's already 3:30. Isn't that amazing? All right. So in this bag, I use the narrow cover stitch and I use the chain stitch. And I just randomly did it to decorate my fabric. And you can see how illustrious that is. Some of it is the fabric, the threads that I used. And I used a whole bunch of different ones. I just created a long rectangle and just did decorative stitching over the whole thing. And that's what created that. Okay, let's see. We've got some other questions here. Does the 7000 have a keyboard so you can name a new save stitch like the Husqvarna Viking was? Well, that would be an interesting thing to find out. So why don't we look and see if that's true? Okay, and I believe it does. But, you know, there's nothing better than seeing how that works. So let's go and look at and see if we can do that. Now, the button to save a stitch, say if I decided that I like this stitch, but I was working with a very thick thread, like that yellow thread that I showed you earlier. So if I'm working with a heavier cord, like something that's an 8 or less, which is very, very thick, I would usually lengthen my stitch length. And somewhere here, I've lost my stylus. There it is. Okay. So I've got my stylus. So to lengthen my stitch length, I'm going to go and change my stitch length. I don't think I need to change anything else. But if I had a reason to, I could do it. You'll see here it's recommending the size of the needle. Now, to save it, I'm going to go over and I'm going to touch the button. All right. And you can see there's already a stitch that's in here. And I've already named it Gathering. So the answer is yes. Isn't that wonderful? I love that we can name our stitches and save it. Now, I could just come in here and now I can save it. And I can overwrite that stitch. I'm going to just close out of there. All right. So when you go here, you see the first stitch is named Gathering, right? And if there was another stitch that I saved, I would have saved it here in the position 2. So you can save it wherever you want to, and you can name it. So that is a really nice feature that you can make your own stitches, make any changes you want to, and then name it, just like we can our sewing machine. That's actually really kind of what's happening here is that our sergers and our sewing machines have many things in common. Our sewing machines have automatic tension, but we can still override them if we have a reason to do something different. And now our sergers can do exactly the same thing. So I love, love, love our automatic tension, but I wouldn't want a machine where I couldn't override it so that I can do my own thing, because that's where the creative stuff comes from. Okay. So we have talked about the cover stitch and the chain stitch, and you've seen how that works. There's very little difference, right? Look at how quick, as long as you're working with the cover stitch type of stitches, there's very little between a chain stitch, a cover stitch, a triple cover stitch. You would put 3 needles in and an extra thread, but it's very easy to change those over. If you go to change from a cover stitch to overlock, there's a couple more steps, and I'll show you how that's done. So don't worry. I think we've got plenty of time for that. But before we go any farther, I did want to show you, this was a chain stitch. So it was a single stitch. And maybe we can find a little bit easier here to see it on the table. I'll put the camera back over here and let's switch it up a little bit. So there's my chain stitch. You can see I used a variegated thread, and it's a very sheer organza. And on the other side, You still see a bit of the variegated, but I use a solid color thread on the back of it. After I did this, I was using this with some flowers that I made. Here's one of the flowers that I made with it. And I used the rolled hem over some wire. And if I get a chance, I'll show you how that's done. But so first I decorated the fabric, and then I cut it up into some oval shapes, and I finished the edge of those off with some wire. And you can bend the petals, you can do anything you want to with them. I also decorated the fabric that I used on the button by doing a chain stitch and just a little cross hatching design. And then I used some Swarovski crystals that are hot fix on top of that. So, and you can see here, I just changed up the colors a little bit for this flower. But very, very fun to do, very creative. And it's a whole other different way of crafting. Now, when I did the chain stitch, I could not do that on the Admire Air 5000. I can't do it on an overlock because the chain stitch is sewing in the middle of the fabric. But I could do the rolled hem on the Admire Air 5000 because it's an overlock and it's cutting the edge off and giving it a nice finished stitch. And a couple of other things, let me show you here. Where did they go to? This is an example of the rolled hem done with the fishing line. All it is the rolled hem, and then I decorated the stitch on it. And then afterwards here, you can see it's the same cord, but I added the beads to it to finish that off. So there's other things you can do with this. The only difference between this and putting wire in is nothing, because you're not actually sewing across the wire or across the fishing line. The fishing line is going beside, and then the looper is going to come up. So the needle's on the left of it, and the looper comes up from the right and goes over it. But it never should touch the wire or the fishing line. So it's actually very easy to do. And if I get a chance, I'll show you how to do that. But so here's another example of what you can do with a rolled hem. I actually moved the needle was in the right position, and it looks like there's a lot more stitching added onto it. The very first time I did it, it cut the fabric away, and I could still see the wire underneath it. So I went back and did a second layer of rolled hem on top of it, just like if you were doing a satin stitch in a sewing machine. Sometimes you find after you've done a satin stitch that you didn't have it full enough. So I could have shortened the length of the stitch down more, or I could have gone over it the second time like I did here. And so Judy asked, am I going to do lessons? So where do you want me to do lessons, Judy? On a Facebook Live or some videos, or how would you like me to do that? Because I love our sergers, and if there's any way I can help you out, I will. But honestly, you should be going also back to your dealer and asking them to do some classes too, because if they're not doing classes, they're missing out, because there's so much fun, creative things they can do. All right. So far on our overlock, we've been talking about only a rolled hem and a narrow hem. The difference between a rolled hem is very, very thin. Then the narrow hem is a little bit thicker, and you can use that to sew seams, but it's not going to give you a lot of strength. I often use a 3-hole rolled narrow stitch when maybe I'm making a garment and I'm not sure if it's going to fit. So I don't want to cut all the fabric off. So I'll take all the patterns pieces. I will do the 3-thread narrow along the whole piece. And then I might sew it together with the sewing machine to see if it fits perfect. Afterwards, I can decide if I want to just leave it like that. But there are some really great ways of finishing your fabric if you're a garment sewer that I like. And I actually have a jacket hiding around the corner. I'll grab it. That I used it. I sewed all the outside edge seams on a 3-thread narrow stitch like this, and then I top stitched the jacket in place, all the pieces, and it looks phenomenal because you can see the decorative stitches afterwards. So if I'm switching over and I went to a wide 3-thread, this is what a wide 3-thread looks like. It's just the same stitch but much wider. You can use it to seam clothing and other things, but I like to use a 4-thread if I'm looking for strength. Usually when I'm using a 3-thread, I'm using it in a decorative way. So here is that placemat that I made, and I use the 3-thread to cover the edges like that. You can see I used a different fabric on the other side. For me, a 3-thread is decorative. The other thing that I did with a 3-thread was this scarf, and I'll show you how I did it. All right. This scarf, all of this is thread. There is no fabric. And I started with a wash away, a dissolve away actually. And all I did was sew one row. Here it is in the purple. And I had the wash away stabilizer. You can see the shiny part of it. And then I did another row that overlapped this. All of our sergers have some really great feet that you can use. So there's lots of options for feet. And if you're using this, you can use, there's some feet that have a bar with it, some like the blind hem foot that you can kind of not cut off anything you don't want to cut off. And then here is just row after row that I've been stitching. I can come over here on this side and I can add another row here because I got the stabilizer. And as long as you overlap it, it won't fall apart. Now, if you accidentally do an oops and you miss it, it can create a lot of interest in your design, but you could also go back and fix it afterwards by just going with a sewing machine and do a little zigzag in the same color, and you would never notice it. So let's see. You know, we did talk about doing another live with our sergers and doing some more hands-on creative classes, and maybe we'll do some YouTube videos too. So we'll try and make it work. And I hope that you find this as interesting as I do, because a lot of people have an impression that a serger is just for finishing the edges off of garment. And really that might have been true, you know, 30, 40 years ago. But today our sergers can do so many creative things that I just love it. Now, I also, when I'm doing a serger, the other thing I use a 4-thread for is for seaming my quilt blocks. I do a lot of piecing my quilts. Here's an example of a quilt. All right. And what I love about piecing a quilt with a serger is you've got these beautiful finished seams. And so everything just looks perfect. And that's something that on a normal quilt, when you're working with a lot of pieces, you'll know that when you've got the whole top together, there's threads everywhere. Sometimes it can take you hours to cut them apart. But this is really something that if you're serging pieces, especially when you're doing strip piecing like this, that a serger is just perfect for. And I do usually not make too many changes. I use a 4-thread because I want strength. I want this to be really, really strong so that if it's going to be maybe a grandchild using it, or it's going to be thrown in the wash all the time, that it's not going to come apart. And a 4-thread serged edge is going to give you a really nice finished edge. So let's see, as we're going, what else I have up my sleeve. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to come over and I will pull over my jacket to show you what I was talking about. Let me just see if I can pull this over. All right, so I had to change my camera to hide it. This is a jacket. It's made out of wool, and you can see the edging of it. Where you're seeing that black, that is a 3-thread narrow seam. And each piece was finished ahead of time. Do you see the edge right here? All this edge was finished with a 3-thread narrow thread. And then after that was done, all the pieces were put together by laying one on top of itself and overlapping it. So right now I can put my finger underneath. The straight stitch is going down on the outside edge right here, right down where the straight stitch of that 3-thread narrow hem is. My nose is itchy because of this wool. I did do some embroideries on it. These are some embroideries from the Creative Icon too. And you can also find them in the Creative Icon. And I love embroidering on wool because it does give it a really nice look. And of course, this jacket has gotten a little bit too small. So I needed to add a little bit of an extra inset there. So I took my metallic thread and made some extra designs in embroidery just on one piece of fabric. I opened up the seam and then I just inset that extra in there for a little bit of bling. Like everything, it's a work in progress. You can see over here, I've got some more embroideries, and it adds so much to it. But look at how nice that is to see that black edge. It totally gives the jacket a whole different level of class that maybe without it, it would be just a boring green jacket. So there, because it's wool, both sides of the fabric are finished and nice and firm, and they really hold up well to have that 3-thread narrow edge on the outside edge of that. The same stitch that I just showed you on that jacket is the same stitch that you will find on this blanket. And this is a terry cloth towel, and it's, you can see it's just a nice baby size, beautiful. And I used a yarn in the thread. Now, in this case, it's a 3-thread, right? So I have one needle that you're going to see over on the edge here. This edge is right here is the needle. And then I have my upper looper and my lower looper. That's what you're seeing. You don't see the needle. So in this case, I might take my needle and make it either the same blue or white that matches my fabric. And then in the loopers, I used a Success yarn, which comes on a spool. Anytime I'm working with things that are on a yarn, I'm not talking about yarn that you go into the craft store and buy a ball, a skein of yarn. There are a lot of threads that have the same appearance as yarn. They're very thin and they're on a spool like this, but they're fuzzy. So there's a Madeira Lana's got like this. This is a sulky filane. There's all different kinds of threads that you can do this with. There's also some thicker ones like this. I just discovered this, and it is just beautiful. A heavy, heavy cord. Let me see if I can get up there a little bit closer to you so you can see that. All right. And when you're looking at that, if you're stitching a 3-thread rolled hem, that's what it looks like. You would never know that that same delicate rolled hem that you're seeing on this fabric right here can also do this same thing. And its only difference is changing the thread. Instead of using a regular 30 or 40 weight or 60 weight thread, I'm using something that's much, much thicker. And afterwards, what I discovered is if you're going to use heavier cords like this one, or this is a Wonderfill thread that is just gorgeous and nice and heavy, is that you need to lengthen the stitch length. Because when you're working with a thinner thread, it's a very heavy stitch and it's very close together. So it won't work if you use the same stitch length. So this might be another one that you can set a stitch and say that you want to use, set it up for heavier threads, and you can call it heavier threads rolled hem and lengthen the stitch length. And then you will get that beautiful, beautiful finished edge. Somebody asked about the thread for the necklace, and you can see this is what that cord looks like. It is, I used a heavier thread. Well, actually what I used was this in the upper looper. I used the yarn in the lower looper, and I used just a regular thread in the needle. And this one here is a Madeira, and it's called Decora. I just came across this the other day. I haven't had it that long, but it has got such a beautiful shine to it that I'm just, it comes in a whole bunch of different colors too. I bought it in 3 different colors. So who knows what I'll be making next with it. But to me, the thread is everything, right? The stitch itself is relatively simple. A rolled hem is a rolled hem. But if you can put this heavier yarn in it and get a look like this, this just gives you a whole different level of things you can do. It can be strong enough that you can make a bag purse. You could take this and weave it and make something else with it. But it is strong enough that nothing happens to it when you pull it. The other thing I've done with this, instead of just doing the 3-thread rolled hem with no fabric, is I used an elastic thread inside. I'm not sure I can put my hand on that one. But so the same cord, if you use an elastic thread in it, I thought, well, it's already pretty, got some give to it. How would an elastic thread make a difference? But it does. If you use an elastic thread in the middle of it, then what happens is it actually has a lot of stretch. So if that's what you're looking for, using the elastic thread would be a pretty cool thing to do. So I do want to show you, if you were working with fishing line or you're working with wire, how you would put it in and what you would do with it. Because I'm going to do it on the Admire Air 5000, which is the overlock machine, remember? So what I'm going to do is switch over my cameras, and I'll show you where the wire goes so that you can kind of see how to do that. Now, let me see if I can find my wire or my fishing line here. This is that's a 26 gauge wire right here. The one that I did for the flowers was 24 gauge, and you can use probably up to 20 gauge. After you get thicker than that, it's a bit too thick. So let me just see if I can cut a piece of this wire. All right. So the way this works, just like it does with the fishing line, I like to have a foot that will put it and stop the wire from going over into the blade. The secret is making sure that the wire doesn't go across the blade and in front of it, because then that can harm your blade. Nothing can go where that blade is. You should never be using pins. You should never be using anything close to the edge of your serger when you're seaming anything. All right. So I'm going to just place the wire here so you can see where it's going. It's going to go to the right of the needle, and it's going to go. And what's going to happen is the looper is going to come over on top of it like that. And that's how it gets stitched into place. Let me get a little better view of this. So obviously the wire doesn't go on top of the foot. I need to lift up the presser foot and put the wire underneath. And all I'm going to do is slide the foot underneath, the wire underneath, and make sure that when I put my presser foot down, that the wire is to the right of the needle. All right. I'm not sure you can see that. I've got green wire in there. I can see that the wire is to the right of the needle. And so now it's still doing the rolled hem, but the wire is going to be encapsulated in there. So this would make, instead of it being just a very flimsy stitch, I could be making a decorative ribbon out of this organza. And I'm not really sitting completely in place so I can get as good a view as I'd like to do. So we'll just hope that everything works well. Now, if you use this, move this out of the way in the front, you'll see there are 3 lines in the stitch place. When I was using the fishing line this morning, I kept the wire in the one, there's like a little groove there. I kept the fishing line in the groove that was the one on the right. All right. And all I did as I was sewing was I just kept the fishing line in that little groove, and it held it in place perfectly. But normally I would like to use a different kind of foot. Whoops.
Karen, can you check your screen? It's really blurry. We can't see the foot.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that, guys. Somehow it got knocked, maybe. Is that any better? Thanks for letting me know about that. It is kind of blurry. Maybe it's because it's so close. Let me see if I can get a better view. You see the wires right here, okay? It's not as good a view as I want. Let me see if I can get my other camera over here. Thanks for letting me know, guys. Okay. This one, I think I can get a better view. Let me just switch it over. All right. There we go. All right. So I'm just going to come over. All right. So my wire's right here. All right. And you'll see the grooves in the stitch plate. There's 3 grooves in the stitch plate. I'm kind of just keeping that wire pressed into that little groove, and it'll do all the work for me. So it never comes anywhere near where the looper is. But you can't go to sleep. You have to pay attention when you're doing this, all right? And all I'm going to do is put my foot on the pedal and start sewing. Oh, you know what? I put my foot on the pedal, but it won't sew because I have this open. So now I'm going to close it. All right. And now that I've got it started, I'm just going to keep the wire kind of set where I want it to go. All right, I'll do a little bit more and then I'll stop and show you. So the wire's not going anywhere near where the blade is. All right, now I'm just going to stop, lift up my foot, and I'll pull it off and see if I can get that released. Let me just put my foot down again and I'll sew off. All right, now let's look at that. There's the wire. See how nicely it's caught in there? Gives it a beautiful finish. And it's got some nice shape to it, but it's not so stiff that it won't bend very easily, and then it won't crack. Let me come over to the other camera. So look at how fine that fabric is and how beautiful that wire is in there. And that's what I did for the poppy. I just took the fabric. I had a shape, an oval shape, and then I encapsulated that edge of that organza with the wire, and that gives me the look. You can see this would gather up nicely, but this could be a fancy ribbons for a wedding. If you like making nice gifts, then you can make your own wired ribbon for, you know, the holidays. And thank you for letting me know about the camera. I really appreciate that. I hate it when it doesn't work out right, but I hope you got a good enough view, and make sure to tune in to our next Facebook Live. It's going to be May 10th at 2 p.m. Central Time, 3 p.m. Eastern, and Mickey's going to be teaching you all what you need to know about the background wizard and assistant. That's going to be on my Sonet. And then also there's another Facebook Live for PFAFF, May 4th at 2 p.m. Central, and it's with Wendy Owens, and she's going to be doing texturizing your fabric in embroidery. So lots of fascinating things to come, and I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about some creative things you can do with a serger, and I promise to try and get some more things to you soon. So look for some more serger creating in the future. Thank you for joining me all, and I will answer any of your comments that you had that I haven't gotten to. I'll make sure to come back and answer them. So if you still have a question that I didn't answer, make sure to post it. And I'll say goodbye to all of you. It's been wonderful. Thanks again. See you soon.